Alright, how's everyone doing? Hope you're all doing well. I'm doing well, thanks for asking. And yeah, I'll be playing some Madden NFL 07. So let's go ahead and get started. I know this game is kind of old. So yeah, uh, I know three teams that are in this game that have since relocated. You have the St. Louis Rams in this game have relocated to Los Angeles and become the Los Angeles Rams. I'm the quarterback for the San Diego Chargers in the career mode, in the superstar mode, and not in real life, but in this video game. And the San Diego Chargers relocated from San Diego to Los Angeles, so they're in Los Angeles. They're in Los Angeles with the Rams, and you also have the make a note or something. You also have the Oakland Raiders, which they relocated to Las Vegas actually, and they're known as the Las Vegas Raiders. I think all the other teams have essentially stayed in the still playing the same area. So of the three relocations, I think St. Louis to moving the Rams to the from St. Louis to Los Angeles makes the most sense, financial wise and geographic wise, just because they have to travel from St. Louis to Seattle, Arizona, and San Francisco on a year-to-year basis. So I know that kind of adds up over time. The travel expenses plus playing everyone, moving everything they need to move. So that makes sense financially. The Chargers, in a sense, kind of don't make sense because the Rams were gonna move to Los Angeles, and now you're in the same city as the Rams, so you're kind of fighting for fans, to come to your games. So I know the Rams kind of play in Inglewood, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, but my point still stands. Oakland makes sense because Oakland's right across the river from San Diego, not San Diego, San Francisco. So in a sense, you're kind of fighting for fans with the 49ers. Since you move as we get sacked there, all the other teams actually stayed in the same area. Oh, it's a shame that the Chargers have quite a few players that never won a Super Bowl. They have Philip Rivers in this game. They have Philip Rivers. They have uh, LaDainian Tomlinson and Antonio Gates, and Terrence Keel as well, in my opinion. We got sacked on one play and we threw two incompletions. So I know someone that's actually in the game, but he's a free agent. His name is Reggie Swinton. I met Reggie Swinton, so he worked at my school. So probably gonna get the first down. Tony Gonzalez is another great tight end that actually didn't win the Super Bowl, but he's with Kansas City in this game, if I remember correctly. Either Kansas City or Atlanta, I don't remember. I know in Kansas City had to deal with they had to deal with Denver uh, when Tony Gonzalez was there, if he was there, or with when Peyton Manning was there actually. 'Cause Peyton Manning is a phenomenal quarterback. And then Indianapolis when Peyton Manning was in Indianapolis in the AFC. Uh, they also had to deal with the Chargers, but Philip Rivers. Why is it not letting me call a play? Then you also had Tom Brady and the New England Patriots in their dynasty, and you had Ben Roethlisberger, who spent his entire career in Pittsburgh as well. Who were dominant. I think it was much easier to get to the Super Bowl in the NFC in the mid 2000s than it was in the AFC. In the years that this game came out. Because AFC, you had some pretty good teams in San Diego. You had some pretty good teams in you had San Diego, Pittsburgh. You had what else do you have? You had New England. And you had Indianapolis as well. Now you had some great individual players on other teams like Tony Gonzalez in Kansas City, but Baltimore was good towards the end of the 2000s decade when they had Joe Flacco as their quarterback. They managed to win a Super Bowl with him as well. I know he got injured, and then Lamar Jackson started playing well. Around the 2016-ish season, around that time. So yeah. See, in the AFC East, you had it was just New England that was good around this time when this game came out. Because Miami wasn't good. They were usually amongst one of the worst teams. They have a good quarterback now in Tua Tagovailoa. I think that's how you pronounce his name, but he can't stay healthy. It's the main issue. Then you had New York hasn't been good. They were only good for like 2 seasons in like 2009, 2010. The Jets, I mean, not talking about the Giants. The Giants were a phenomenal team when this game came out with Eli Manning. Then you had Buffalo actually. Buffalo was not that good. Buffalo was good when they had Jim Kelly, but then they just didn't have any top tier quarterbacks until they got Josh Allen. To play quarterback in the NFL, you have to be good. Don't get me wrong. Even the worst quarterback in the NFL history will always be better than me. But relative to the other teams, they didn't have good quarterbacks in between Jim Kelly and uh, Josh Allen. So where they could realistically win the Super Bowl. San Diego could have, but when they had Philip Rivers, their main issue is that if they were always Super Bowl contenders. They were always like one of the better teams in the AFC. If it wasn't New England favorite to win, it would either be them, it'd either be the Chargers, the Steelers, or the Colts favorite to win. And you know, they just didn't. They just weren't lucky that they couldn't make it to the Super Bowl. I think the close, if I remember off the top of my head, with Philip Rivers, the closest chance was in 2007. But unfortunately for him, it was the wrong season to make it to the AFC Championship because Uh, in the regular season and the playoffs, the only team that beat New England were the Giants in the Super Bowl. Well, they did lose in the preseason, but you know, the preseason is like they didn't have their main starters play a whole lot. It's more so to give people who might make the team an opportunity to play. So, oh, so did I lose yards on that play? Because I was tackled behind the line of scrimmage. Yes, I did, but I didn't have enough chance to actually. I didn't have a chance to actually get off the. It was a run play, but I didn't have enough chance to actually throw the ball. So so no gain of yards there. That's gonna be out of bounds, unfortunately. So yeah, the Chargers were the only team in the mid 2000s that realistically had a chance, to actually come out, at least make the Super Bowl. I know Oakland won the Super Bowl in 2002, but I consider that to be in like the early part of the decade. I'm talking about like 2004 to like 2008, where Oakland didn't really have a good quarterback, or at least weren't, Super Bowl contenders. Oh man, that's unfortunate for us. So Tennessee had a couple of decent quarterbacks, but they weren't. If they made the playoffs, they weren't realistically gonna go to the Super Bowl. Jacksonville, I think, throughout the entire franchise, they only made the AFC Championship twice, and the early 2000s, like the entire 2000s decade, I didn't really see them being Super Bowl contenders. Houston, same with Houston didn't come into the league until around 2004. So I don't really, that their first decade in the league, they weren't really a good playoff team. Which, to be fair to the Houston Texans, they you'd expect that of any team in any league entering the league, as an expansion team to not do well. You know, it's possible for a team to do well, but like I know the Vegas Golden Knights went all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals in the NHL in their first season, so it is possible for an expansion team to do well. But you know, it's more often than not the teams in their first year struggle. Actually, Baltimore became a really good team in the late 2000s decade. So I know they had Joe Flacco as quarterback. I know Tennessee had a quarterback in Vince Young who I thought was going to do well in the NFL, but I thought he was going to do well and play like a high level, but that just didn't happen, unfortunately. So I know Troy Smith did well in the Heisman. I think he may have won the Heisman at Ohio State, but I thought he was going to do well in the NFL when he was drafted, but he just didn't. So see who else. See the quarterbacks because came into the league because 2006 was around the time I first really. Well, it was Madden NFL 6 was the first Madden I got. So, so we're in the end zone there. I didn't really start watching until like 2007 though. But I started like familiarizing myself in like 2006 though. So I turned skills on this team. Unfortunately, he never won a Super Bowl. A good player. Great player actually. So let's see. Who was the I know the Commanders in Washington actually struggled for this decade. Um, the Giants did well in the 2000s decade with Eli Manning winning one Super Bowl. You know, in the 2007 season, that I remember that historic Super Bowl because I have memories of the Super Bowl where Pittsburgh beat Seattle 21-10, but I don't remember entirely watching that Super Bowl. I have memories of the next Super Bowl where Indianapolis beat Chicago for Peyton Manning's first Super Bowl win. You know, Rex Grossman was that talented. You know, he was a talented quarterback. So for Chicago, you make sure I do not lose any rushing yards. So I have 22 rushing yards on 4 attempts. But you know, eventually he's another one I thought like he and you know Kyle Orton were two quarterbacks I thought that were going to be better than they actually were and had better careers. So, but you know the 2007 season was the very first season where I really got into in depth of the you know NFL where I really started watching. That's the year New England went 16-0 in the regular season. The only time ever a team has won every single game in a 16 season game. You know, there have been more teams that have went winless in a 16 game regular season than a team that has won that team that went undefeated in a 16 game regular season. Because the Patriots in 2007 went 16-0 as I mentioned, but they lost in the Super Bowl to New York, the Giants, and that has to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Super Bowl upsets of all time. I remember watching that Super Bowl actually, and whereas actually the 2008 season, the year after New England went undefeated, they lost Tom Brady in the first game due to if I remember correctly, his knee injury, some sort of leg or knee injury, and so Detroit actually next year went 0-16. They went winless, and then no team went winless until Cleveland did it in 2017. Of course, of the franchises that you would franchises that would go 0-16, you'd expect Detroit's and Cleveland to be on there. You know, you'd have expected New York to be in there at some point, and then with Dallas's inconsistent play, I wouldn't have been too surprised. But you know, in the '90s, on the other hand, they did well, but then they had Tony Romo as quarterback and Dak Prescott. So outside of those two seasons, and in the '90s and prior, I wouldn't, you know, well, I say that, but I wouldn't, if they didn't have such a good, if they didn't have good quarterbacks playing for them, I could see them going winless. New York had a good coaching, Rex Ryan, and a good coach with Mark Sanchez, and they lost in the AFC Championship. So, like 2009 or 2010. Philly wasn't exactly a good team. I don't think they were bad, but I don't think they were good in the 2000s decade, from my memory. And there weren't really only a great team in the NFC East around this time was um, New York, the Giants. So the Dallas, the Cowboys have some good players, but over the past couple of decades, at least since the late '90s, they have had good and great players. They just for some reason can't put it together and get a good Super Bowl run. So have a good Super Bowl run. So I don't know what they're missing, but they're just lacking the some pieces. So like in the mid 2000s, they had Tony Romo and they had Terrell Owens, on their roster as on offense, which I know you need good defensive players, but Tony Romo was a he was a good quarterback. He wasn't great or legendary, but he wasn't exactly bad either. He was good. He was better than the average NFL quarterback, but he wasn't like amongst the greats of his. You know, he wasn't like that. In a sense, he was like Eli Manning. I could see him being like Eli Manning. Yeah, I could. Ow! I hit my leg on my chair. Ow! So I could say like, yeah, he was the great of his time, but I don't think he's like the. He'll be remembered as one of the greatest of all times, but like, I'd say like him and Eli were like a tier, like a level or two below the all-time. Like he and I don't know if this makes sense, but like when they were playing, Eli Manning and him were like more or less on the same level, in my opinion, of playing as quarterbacks. But if you rank them all time, you'd rank Eli Manning ahead because he managed to win Super Bowls and he managed to beat the undefeated Patriots in the Super Bowl. So great, but they're not, they're great players, but you wouldn't rank them amongst the all-time greats, if that makes any sense. Like Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, you'd rank as an all-time great, and then now to Eli Manning's credit, I think I'd rank him like a little bit worse off than Philip Rivers, despite having two more Super Bowl wins. But that's because when Eli won his Super Bowls, it was easier for an NFC team to get to the Super Bowl than it was for any AFC team. I think due to the AFC being a much harder division to win your conference championship. Because you had Dallas, which you couldn't rule Dallas out, because of their quarterback play and, when Terrell Owens was there. Now, I say the Eagles were bad, but, we're okay. But, they had Donovan McNabb as well. He's another great player of his time. So, like, I could see Dallas and Philadelphia making the playoffs, but not really winning. You could see them making the playoffs with the teams they had, but not really winning the Super Bowl. No, the really only serious contenders were like the New York Giants and uh, and the Green Bay Packers on the sum because Green Bay had he had Aaron Rodgers as the backup. This was before he really was an elite quarterback, but he also had Brett Favre as an elite quarterback. Brett Favre will be remembered as an all-time great. Regardless of his off-field controversies after his retirement, uh, make them of make of them what you will, but in terms of his on-the-field play, he was a great. Terrell Owens is an all-time great wide receiver, but I don't think he won a Super Bowl. He was definitely a diva when he when he played. I remember him playing and how the various controversies and arguments with the team and his on the field antics and his off field not necessarily more so like what he'd say off the field than what he did. More so what he'd say. I remember so. Terrell Owens will be a legendary wide receiver as well. It was in the NFC West. Seattle, I know they made the playoffs in 2005. They made the Super Bowl, but they kind of struggled afterwards. It'd be a decade before like they'd really be playoff. Be nearly a decade before they'd be playoff contenders again, or Super Bowl contenders, I should say. Arizona's another team you actually can't rule out. You can never you can never rule out Kurt Warner though with whatever team he plays on. It seemed like with the uh, with the AFC, you always know it was going to be either New England. In that time, you always thought New England was going to be the best chance of coming out of the AFC. Throughout the majority of the 2000s decade. If not New England, it would you'll be Baltimore those last maybe 1 or 2 years of the 2000s decade. If not Baltimore, be Indianapolis would be just right there, and then San Diego and Pittsburgh would be like the third and fourth seed usually. Whereas the NFC, you never really you can know the teams that would make the playoffs. It'd always be like New York or Arizona. New York definitely, the Giants definitely, or Arizona with Kurt Warner, or um, Dallas had a good quarterback, but you can't really see Dallas being a Super Bowl contender. But Dallas, you could see maybe them losing or like barely qualifying for the playoffs, like losing the first or second round, or maybe missing the playoffs barely. And the Packers, it was always going to be like the Packers were like up there as well. Packers definitely, but it felt like some seasons it felt like it could be like New York or Green Bay could really be the NFC representative. And then we're again Baltimore and New Orleans in their respective conferences weren't really Super Bowl contenders until the like last year or two of the decade, from what I remember. Some drinks to me. I got some acai grape splash blast. I'm about to lose this game and go 0-2. I got some mixed berry Powerade as well. and I got some wild berry splash blast. Well, oh, we don't have any. I was gonna call it timeout, but we don't have any timeouts. So in my defense, one of the things that's hurting me is the how short the quarters are. So let's see. Week 3 is our bye week, actually. Let's take a look at the breakdown because I remember Antonio Gates and Keenan McCardell and Lorenzo Neal, Dalen Tomlinson, Philip Rivers, Darren Sproles, Kerry Collins as well on offense, and Quinn Jammer and Sean Merriman on defense, and Terrence Keel as well. Sorry for showing any offensive names and logos. So yeah, I remember Rolf and Gonzalez as well. I know the quarterbacks, but they weren't like. I remember Patrick Surtain as well, but they weren't like really top tier quarterbacks. They had a good kicker in Lawrence Tynes and a good punch in Dustin Colquitt. Oh yeah, this was after Adam Vinatieri left for New England. He did win a Super Bowl with Indianapolis, so my first season actually. How many rushing touchdowns do I have? I have one. That was actually my first rushing touchdown of my career. How was it? Oh yeah, this was when Drew Bledsoe was the quarterback. He was a good quarterback as well. This was before Tony Romo. I remember Dante Culpepper. He was another one I thought was gonna have a better career than he actually did. I thought he was gonna be like a really top tier quarterback. So Jeff Garcia, Donovan McNabb, I thought would be a Super Bowl winner. He nearly was with the Eagles when they lost to the Patriots. Michael Vick was a good quarterback, but I couldn't see like the Falcons. Up until like the end of the decade, but that was when Michael Vick was suspended. 49ers, Alex Smith. Thought he'd be better than he actually was. Same with Byron Leftwich. I don't know why I thought Byron Leftwich would be a quarterback. And then Chad Pennington. I remember him. And I know Dan Orlovsky looks with ESPN, but I remember when he played, so. Brett Favre, who at one time, and Aaron Rodgers. I know Brett Favre at one time was the all-time NFL career passing yards leader. I remember Jake Delhomme taking the Panthers to the Super Bowl as well. Tom Brady. I remember Matt Cassell's breakout season because that was the 2008 when Mark Bolger. Anyway, Ryan Fitzpatrick's there as well. So, remember Matt Cassell having a rest in peace, Steve McNair and Vince Gill. Sorry for showing any offensive team names and logos. So I remember that Matt Cassell had a really good breakout year in 2008. He did better than people expected. I know Joe Brees was with the Saints. Matt Hasselbeck, I remember him. David Carr's a bust, but I think it's a bit unfair to call him a bust. I know his rookie season was the inaugural season for the Houston Texans, and Houston did not Like when I would later learn about the league, Houston did not whatsoever give him like the best offensive line that they could have. They did not give him a very good offensive line. I remember Brian Greasy as well. Red Scoresman. Kyle Orton I thought would be better than he actually would as well. I remember Carson Palmer being a decent quarterback. So it seems like each team had a decent quarterback, but most teams did. Remember Jake Plummer. But Warner led the team to a Super Bowl appearance in 2008. So, although I'm pretty sure that Kurt Warner could lead any team to a Super Bowl. Ah, shoot. I do have to go out, so I would run. I would actually play another game, but I do actually have to, So I'm going to hop off, y'all. Deuces.